Good evening.
It is a pleasure to welcome you to Clark Atlanta University tonight. My name is Ingrid Saunders Jones, and I am wearing multiple Carl Ware hats tonight. You see, I worked for Mr. Ware at City Hall when he was City Council President. I worked for Mr. Ware at the Coca-Cola Company for many years throughout his career. And I know, parenthetically, I will add that many of you see him as a mild-mannered, gentle man. I am here to testify that he is a tough boss, and there are some people in this audience who can testify to the same. I am also a trustee of Clark Atlanta University, and I chair the Institutional Advancement Committee. And last but not least, I did my first year of graduate work at Atlanta University. I want to thank each and every one of you very much for joining us, the Panther family, as we shine a light on one of CAU's most celebrated graduates, Mr. Carl Ware, who indeed is, as his book is titled, an American businessman of the highest order. And we are gathered this evening in this special place, the Carl and Mary Ware Building. And I think it is fitting to introduce the other half of our philanthropic benefactor, Ms. Mary Ware. Won't you stand, Mary? I'd also like to acknowledge the person who suggested that Mr. Ware hold this event at his beloved alma mater, and that person who just stepped down from serving as CAU's interim president is Miss Lucille Moget. Let's give her a big round of applause. Stand up. And last and most certainly not least, we want to welcome and to some introduce our new president, the 5th president of Clark Atlanta University. He has been here 22 days, but he has been involved in education for over 23 years. Dr. George French, won't you stand? Our chairman, Greg Morrison, is traveling and could not be here, but our vice chairman is here. He is Mr. Leonard Walker, the founder and CEO of QFG Holdings, and he is a finance and economic guru. Mr. Leonard Walker, won't you take the podium?
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Well, good evening. Toni Morrison once said, if there's a book that you want to read, but it hasn't been written yet, then you must write it. I'm not a writer, but I believe that's what Carl Ware just did for us. He's written a book that I think we all want to read. The entire book is certainly a history lesson, and I appreciate and would suggest, Dr. French, that at least chapter 25 become mandatory reading for our students, The Making of Clark Atlanta University. It's fascinating reading, and thank you, Mr. Ware, for persevering over the last 16 years, as you've done throughout your career, telling a story we all need to hear. On behalf of the Clark Atlanta University Board of Trustees, I bring each of you greetings and thanks. Thanks to you, Ms. Moget, for your dedication and leadership, and welcome again to Dr. George T. French. I'm honored to have this opportunity, along with those present here today, to be a part of this historic evening, on this historic campus, in this historic building, the house that Carl and Mary Ware built. Thank you.
Now that's serious. Yeah.
As one of the key visionaries and architects of the consolidation of Clark College and Atlanta University, and the very first chairman of the Board of Trustees after the consolidation of these two venerable institutions of higher education in 1988, Clark College and Atlanta University. Mr. Ware has dedicated his time, talent, and resources to help provide a better and brighter future for the young, gifted, and deserving students that CAU serves. From his humble upbringing in Noonan, Georgia, to his political career, to his leadership on the national and international world stage, Mr. Ware has been a true testament to what it means to succeed if you study hard, work hard, stay focused, and not be concerned with who gets the credit. On behalf of a grateful Board of Trustees, thank you, Mr. Ware, for your outstanding and continued leadership, for your dedication to CAU, and for your service. Thank you. Now back to my colleague, Ms. Ingrid Saunders-Jones.
Thank you, Leonard. You know, on the campus of Clark Atlanta University and in the city of Atlanta, some might say that Carl Ware really needs no introduction, but I'm going to introduce him anyway, because it is easy to forget the breadth and the depth of his accomplishments. He was born and reared in Noonan, Georgia, the son of UB and Lois Ware. Bachelor's degree from Clark College, master's degree from the University of Pittsburgh, the School of International Public Affairs, a 1991 graduate of the Harvard Business School's International Senior Management Program, elected to the Atlanta City Council in 1973, served as the Atlanta City Council president from 1976 until 1979. In '79, he was named Vice President of Special Markets for Coca-Cola USA, the domestic operating unit for the Coca-Cola Company. In 1982, Mr. Ware was elected and promoted to Vice President of Urban Affairs at the Coca-Cola corporate headquarters. In 1986, he was named Senior Vice President. He then went on to become Deputy Group President for Northeast Europe, Africa. And in 1991, something revolutionary happened at the Coca-Cola Company. He was named President of the Coca-Cola Africa Group. He has served, as you heard, as chair of Clark College, was a part of the leadership of the consolidation of Clark College and Atlanta University, was the first board chair, as you heard. He has the reputation for being a value-added board member, corporate board member. Nowhere was that more evident than his service on the Chevron board. He also served on the Cummings board, the PGA Properties Committee board, the Georgia Power Company board. And he also chaired the United Way campaign, chaired the Chamber of Commerce, chaired the Capital Campaign for the Boy Scouts of America, and the list could go on and on. His honorary degrees and his UNCF awards are among many you will read about. Portrait of an American businessman, one generation, from the cotton field to the boardroom. Mr. Ware, come tell us how this book came to be. Let's give Carl Ware a big round of applause.
Thank you very much, Ingrid, for that splendid introduction. The one generation part of the title of the book came from Ingrid Saunders-Jones.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and we, together with a team of very talented and professionals in this field of the art of writing and literary science, we were able to pull together something that was pretty special, I think, and it's called Portrait of an American Businessman, One Generation from Cotton Field to Boardroom. So thank you all for coming, and there are a few introductions that I'd like to make at this moment. There were a lot of people in on this effort. As Leonard has said, it took about 16 years to get this thing off the ground and finally published. But throughout that process, there were numerous people who joined in with me along this journey, and I want to talk about them a little bit. First and foremost, my partner, my co-author, terrific writer, 6 books, Sibley Fleming, who has done so much to help me with this project. And then there's Ed Hall, who is in his own right an author and a copy editor who did all of the copy editing. And there's Paulette Jones, who is my personal assistant and social media, and God knows I need all the help I can get in the field of social media. Judy Duran is my publicist. She's not here, but there are some people here that I want to talk a little bit about, and that's my niece Pam Ware, who has stepped in and done a brilliant job of just bird dogging everything. I mean, she is just quite the leader. There are a couple of people here that are just so special to me because they've just been a part of my life for so long that I can't even imagine being in this world without them. And one is my good friend, a first reader and legal advisor, personal family counsel, Larry Dingle.
Woo!
And of course, Ingrid alluded to me as being a tough boss. I'm going to tell you who the boss is. Ingrid Saunders Jones is the boss. Make no mistake about it. I have so many of my family members here tonight, and I'm going to start with my lovely wife, Mary, who I met right here on campus, right behind this building. Now, don't take that. 55 years ago, literally, I guess if you walked through that wall, you would walk out into what is called the quadrangle. And that's about 30, 40 feet. That's where we met 55 years ago, and we've been together ever since. 53 of those years we've been husband and wife, but those 2 years before, we were almost there, you know. But my granddaughter, Renita, and my grandson, Aaron, and my great-grandson, Tatum, are here. So many of my family members are here. I'm almost just tempted to say, y'all all stand, but I want to point out Louise Lynch and Mildred Brown and my brother Walter, who's not here, and my brother Thomas, a veteran of 2 tours of service in the Vietnam War, and a survivor, a real survivor, and my hero. And then there's Evelyn, there's Joyce, there's Pebbles, there's Karen, there's Shalinda, there's, oh y'all, just stand and let the folks see you. Thank you. I don't know if she's here, but Loretta Parham, who is the head of the Woodruff Library, is someone who I have to pay a special tribute and thanks to because, you know, there were days when we didn't have anywhere to go to write, and it was so convenient, the Woodruff Library, that we would come into space in rooms that were secure and nobody knew we were there. We were right next door to the archives where I could go and research Andy's work or Maynard's work and my own work, and we all have papers there. So that was a great tribute. And to my Clark Atlanta University family, thank you so much for what you all have done for me and my family over these years. There's a gentleman here from the Mercer University Press. His name is Alan Walker. Mercer University Press has been my partners in this journey, and they took me on sight unseen and unknown entity, and work with me, and we produce what you see here today as hopefully a successful product. I want to recognize one of my very closest friends in the world, and he has written a book called Determined. His name is Felker Ward Jr. Felker, please stand, and I want y'all to read this book. This man is, he is all about Atlanta, and he has done so much for this city that, and stories untold that you'll read in his book. One day, about a year ago, I was asking around how to go to market with this book, and I called Felker, and Felker said, "Carl, let me tell you how I'm going to market," and I followed his blueprint. Thank you, Felker, for what you've done for me. In this book, there are over 40 personal interviews conducted. There are over 100 hours of transcribing and research. There were 4 trips to South Africa, meeting with Archbishop Tutu, Ambassador Barbara Masekela, the Kanini brothers, Eric Mafuna, Phil Gucci. These are old people that you'll read about in the book. There are stories behind each and every one of them. Learning the use and reliability of technology was something that was completely foreign to me until I met with Sibley and Paulette, who taught me how to use things like Grammarly, fact check. You know, I mean, it's just stuff that I had no idea existed, let alone how to put it and apply it in the process of writing a book. Just a couple of other things about the book. There are more than 25 stories in the book. Most of the stories are being told for the first time as I lived them and as God would ordain. I tell my stories through the lives of dozens of other people, people who traveled with me over this magnificent journey of producing this book. There's my family. There's my high school coach. There's my college professors. There are preachers of the gospel, Reverend Kimbrough, one of my closest and best friends, and leading all the way through and back to Reverend Lumpkin. And you know, I grew up under him back down in Oak Grove Baptist Church, and Kevin Murrell and Cornelius Henderson, and I could just go on and on. I tell stories in this book through the eyes of these spiritual leaders. I tell my story through grassroots community leaders like Miss Susie Laborde here in Atlanta, and like Miss Dorothy Mae Richardson in Pittsburgh, where I learned the art of community organizing and what it meant to gather people together around a common cause. I tell my story through civil rights icons like Andrew Young and like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I tell my story through politicians like Maynard Jackson and many others. I tell my story through corporate giants like Roberto C. Cosueta and like Don Keogh. I tell my story through global icons and people like Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu. I tell my story through the lenses of presidents, Jimmy Carter, generals, Colin Powell. I tell my story through a sheriff in Coweta County named Lamar Potts, who escorted my father to the polls, becoming the first African American to vote in the 5th Congressional District of Georgia at that time since Reconstruction. I tell my story even through a vicious police chief in Atlanta, John Inman. I tell my story through mentors and mentees like Ingrid Saunders Jones and Vicki Palmer and Helen Price, and through many other people who have contributed so much to the life that I have been privileged to live. The most important story I tell in this book is about Lois and Eunice B. Ware. They were engaged parents. They had a great impact on my life, instilling in me the values of hard work, education, preparation, discipline, and humility. These are values that I would need as I sought to overcome seemingly impossible odds, to seize opportunity and make a difference in the lives of others. These were my parents. They were the bedrock of this book. I thank you all for coming, and Ingrid, I think you got a couple of questions you want to ask me.
I do.
All right, well, I'm ready.
But you got to go sit down.
I got to sit down?
Yeah, you got to sit
I
down.
just got started. Okay, I'm ready. Can I get a glass of water?
Get the bottle.
Okay. I got a cold one here. How about that?
You know, one of the questions, well, Carl answered one of the questions I had.
But you don't have to
so,
answer it.
I don't have to ask that one. But I am going to read something from his book, and it is from the foreword by Archbishop Desmond Tutu, because so much of your book covers your relationship with the continent of Africa, with the leaders of the anti-apartheid movement, and kind of address that same resolve and will that all of you had to have. And Archbishop Tutu said, growing up black in the segregated American South is not exactly the same as growing up black in South Africa under apartheid. But from what I know, there are similarities. Both experiences require a willingness to struggle against the forces that are aligned against you and designed to grind you down. And I think, Mr. Ware, what you have talked about is in a world that was designed to restrain people of color, the Ware family broke through. And it was your parents and your siblings and the Coweta County world that enabled you to break through. And you answered part of that question, but talk about that a little bit.
God still is the master of everything that I was taught and I learned growing up in Jim Crow South. Growing up on a farm, I remember one day I was out in the backyard, and this story is in the book, loading sugarcane to the back of the wagon, and my Uncle Alfonso asked me what I wanted to do when I grew up. I told him I wanted to be a businessman. He said, "You don't want to be a teacher, you don't want to be a preacher, you look like a preacher to me." I said, "No, I want to be a businessman." At that moment in time, you might say a kind of, it's an overused word, but epiphany overcame me and started to direct me to understand that it's no excuse not to be prepared. It's no excuse not to have the right education. It's no excuse not to have a goal in mind. It would be an excuse to use racism and the conditions of Jim Crow South to step back and not do what my mother and father had taught me to do. And so not to ignore what it was then and what it still is today, growing up as a black man, not to ignore any of those circumstances, but what one must do is to say, oh yeah, we know those things exist, but let's get on with it. Let's get on with the business of doing what we must do, being as good or better than anyone else who's assigned that job that you got to get done. And that's how we did it.
And I think we've seen that over and over from
Thank you.
And clearly, a pivot point for your life was Clark College.
Oh, wow.
So talk to us about how you got to Clark College.
Well, you know, how I got to Clark College, it was again, it was a village effort that I was working in Noonan Hospital as an orderly, and a group of doctors, white doctors, said to me that they wanted to send me to college. So I got very excited about that. So I told my mother and father that, and he said, Daddy said, son, You can go to school to be a doctor if you want to be. You can go to school to be a lawyer. You can go to school to be a business, whatever you want. But we're going to send you to school. They got together and they collected $100 from the Prince Hall Masons. They collected $100 from Oak Grove Baptist Church. They collected all of the money that they could out of the pockets of my siblings. And together we came up with $400. Tuition, room, and board at Clark was $975 at the time. That was a lot of money.
Somebody said, we wish.
And I got a job at, the doctors did do something that helped me. They recommended me to Grady Memorial Hospital. And I took a job working 8 hours a day at Grady Memorial Hospital. There was a trolley, the Fair Street trolley that went from downtown. So I would get off of work from Grady Hospital at, I worked at the graveyard shift, 11 to 7 a.m. Get off the trolley at Fair Street, go to the dorm, Pfeiffer Hall, wash up a little bit, go to class for an 8 o'clock class. And I repeated that process in order to come up with the tuition, room, and board to make up the beta, I guess, the delta?
The delta.
The delta?
The
Oh,
delta.
yeah, okay. And that's how I got started. And when that job ran out, I got a job at CNS National Bank driving a mail truck. You know, one of the things that my opponents when I ran for public office couldn't figure out was how could I get from a meeting in Buckhead to a meeting at Carver Homes, you know, 30 minutes before they did. Well, my route at the time was all of the CNS National Bank branches. So I made all of those branches every evening in the mail truck. So I knew every alley in City of Atlanta. So I could get from one meeting at Carver Homes or Perry Homes or the Buckhead Businessmen Association or somewhere within 15 or 20 minutes, and my opponents were still struggling to get there an hour later.
Right.
By the time they got there, I had taken, you know, everybody was in my corner. So,
Right.
you know, long story, but all true. Yeah.
So you left Clark College, you went to the University of Pittsburgh,
Wow.
and you were a student, a stellar student there, but that was the place and time that you decided you were coming back to Atlanta.
One of the saddest days of my life was the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I was sitting in my office by the time I had taken a job as director of housing for the Urban League of Pittsburgh, straight out of graduate school. I was 24 years old, had running a program the Ford Foundation funded. I had a staff of 13 people. I was the youngest of all of them. And as the news of Dr. King's assassination came over, I couldn't believe it. Art Edmonds, who was the head of the Urban League in Pittsburgh at the time, told us, you all can just go home to your families this afternoon. We go and pray. I went home and I cried. And I decided at that moment that my job and my duty was back home, that I needed to come back to Atlanta and try to help fulfill the dream that Dr. King died for in Memphis, Tennessee. And that's what inspired me to enter politics, to get elected to the city council, to become the first African-American city council president, working alongside the first African-American mayor of the city of Atlanta, Maynard Jackson. We inherited a city that was, by definition, systematically excluding African-American and women from everything. We changed that paradigm.
You sure did.
And so here I am.
Well, and
And
that,
Andrew Young,
well, wait a minute, we getting
picked
ready
it
to
up.
come to
Oh,
him.
well.
We're getting ready to come to him.
All right.
Because that's
I can't wait.
That's a perfect
My hero, too.
segue. Because Pamela and I put our heads together and we talked. I asked her, what questions have you heard along this path? And then I reflected on the question I heard and most often and still hear. And that is, you were primed to become the mayor of the city of Atlanta, but you chose to go into corporate America. Talk to us about that, because I was working for you then, and I know it was a struggle.
Yeah.
It was a struggle.
Yeah.
And it was ultimately a decision that I think, well, I'll hold my opinion.
Well, you know, as the old folks said, I reckoned that there were at least two more extremely better qualified people to succeed Maynard than I was, and that they would. But there was only one African American who could become a senior vice president of the world's most recognized iconic brand in the world, and to gain and use the power of that company to make a change, not just in America, but in apartheid South Africa. I was that guy. And so I took that opportunity versus running for mayor, and thank God I did. Andy brought the Olympics here, and he succeeded Maynard as mayor, carried that torch of inclusion, and which is still being carried by Mayor Keisha Lance Bottom this day, and was carried by Shirley Franklin after Andy. So we are very lucky in this city to have talented people, and I was so lucky at that time to have you on my team to help me make that decision. It changed my whole life, literally, trajectory.
And my opinion is it was the right decision to make.
I also reckon that maybe one day I could still be mayor. But no.
Well, this is before we have Q&A, because we'll factor in some Q&A. This is a perfect segue time, because there are many distinguished graduates of Clark College, Atlanta University, and Clark Atlanta University, and one of them is here, and her name is Carolyn Young, and she indeed is serves on the Board of Trustees. Her husband is Ambassador Andrew Young, and they have a special presentation they want to present to you, Carl Ware.
And Mary. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Ingrid, it's brilliant. Thank you, sir.
What Carl has been saying is only a glimpse of the truth of one of the most important lives lived in the southern part of the United States in the 20th century. I doubt that there's anybody that has had as much impact on the African continent, particularly South Africa. I know my way around Africa, but I don't know 1/10 of the people that Carl knows, because Carl has approached Africa as a businessman. Now, your preacher will amen me on this, that not everybody will get to heaven going to business. But when you go into business and end up feeding the hungry, and that's what good business does. And I think the story of Carl Ware in South Africa is a story of freedom. When you get to heaven, the Lord will ask you, did you feed the hungry? Did you clothe the naked? Did you heal the sick? Did you set at liberty those who are oppressed? I don't know many people that can answer that. But Carl Ware had an opportunity through the Coca-Cola Company to liberate a company to liberate a country, and really to liberate a continent. And so our foundation wanted to recognize him and Mary, because you can't do this kind of work alone. And so we said we take too many of our folks for granted, and the thing we selected as an honor, and you get plenty of these, but this one I keep on my desk because this world never stops. It keeps going around, and no plugs there. I don't know why it does it, but it takes a magnetic personality around it to keep the world going around, and Carl and Mary have produced that kind of magnetism that have helped to set us all free.
Thank
God
you
bless
so
you.
much. God bless you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Oh, I should say that I didn't earn it, but I got 3 degrees from here for nothing. Clark University,
Clark College.
Clark College, Atlanta University, and then a 3rd from Clark Atlanta University. And I pay through my wife. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Mr. President.
Yes, yes, please. Please, yes, thank you. Yes, thank you.
I should also ask that,
And Carolyn should be.
Yeah, Carolyn should get in there too.
I know you're fine, but come on up.
Carolyn, thank you.
No, that's y'all.
Yeah.
But I met your president in South Africa last year
Tighten up,
at
tighten up.
Johannesburg University. And I didn't know he was going to be your president back then. But we were speaking at the university that graduates the 2nd largest number of black students in the world. And the first is Georgia State,
Yeah.
and up to now. And we're moving together with Clark Atlanta University to be in that number
That's right.
for long.
That's right.
Yes,
Okay, everybody look this way.
thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
You have this. You have this. You take it.
Thank you. I should just thank Carolyn and Andy for their generosity and the tremendous contribution that they make to Clark Atlanta and to the city and to the world. And thank you on behalf of Mary and my family for your splendid presentation and acknowledgement of our efforts to do good. Thank you.
Well, now we've come to the Q&A session, and we offer this time for any questions that you might have. Don't all of y'all raise your hand at one time? Please.
I have a question about how you maneuver and manage with dealing with the politics that come with being C-suite in a major corporate industry.
Well, that's a very good question, and you won't find all of what I'm going to say in my book. Navigating the corporate culture and the corporate structure is a very difficult task, and there are many corporate executives in this room who can attest to that. But I found that there were 2 or 3 things that I kept uppermost and foremost in my work at Coke and the corporate directorships of several big companies. One is keeping your agenda and the company's agenda in a complementary kind of way. That means that as you pursue your career and your advancement, always keep the company's agenda out front and up front and make sure that there's no conflict between the two. The second is to realize that you're working and competing in a global marketplace and against global, it's no longer black and white. You know, it is a global marketplace that you're competing in. And understanding that hard work and preparation. I went back to school, well, let me just give you an example, personal example. I had a master's degree when I took over as vice president of special markets. But quietly and discreetly, I enrolled in the executive MBA program at Georgia State University. And I went to school at night and on weekends because I knew that I needed more quantitative skills, marketing, computer science, finance. That helped me to go to the boardroom and compete with my colleagues at Coke at a level slightly above the way they were competing. When I was promoted to the position of president of Coca-Cola Africa, I said to Roberto and Don, look, these are my heroes at Coke. I don't feel quite like I'm ready. I need to go do something else to get myself better prepared to go to Europe and be the deputy group president of Northeast Europe and Africa. I've got to go to learn how to compete on an international business level. So I paused for another 14 weeks and went to Harvard to study in the International Senior Management Program. There were 94 of us in that class. Only 4 of us were Americans. The rest of my classmates were from 30 countries around the world. We literally dissected 150 industries from top to bottom. So I learned how businesses operated from aviation to finance, to banking, to soft drink, to consumer goods. And so every step along the way, even though I had, quote, made it to the C-suite, I always made sure that once I got there, what would happen? Performance, performance, performance. Never allow, and this is my third point, never allow the color of your skin, your ethnicity, your religion, or any other factor other than your performance and results be the judge of how you behave and how you operate in an organization. You know, don't give them that because get results, perform.
But I would just add, because I was there, Mr. Ware was not afraid. He was not afraid to be very direct about the good, the best, but the bad, and the things that needed correcting. And because of that, he earned the respect of the people he described: Roberto C. Goizueta, Donald Keough, the CEO and the president of the company, respectively. And that's what he was known for. He was known as a problem solver, going back to his talk about competence. And he was honest, he was direct, and he was not afraid.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you.
There's a question right there.
Well, I'm Dr. Joyce McGriff, and I was at the Coca-Cola Company when Mr. Ware came. And what I'd like to say, and to acknowledge to you, Carl, is that at the point at which you came to the company, you could count on your hands the few little black folks in the company. And what it meant for him, there were 2 black vice presidents of Coca-Cola USA, and I worked under one of them. But your rise to the level that you have meant a lot to the black people in that company. When you are rising
can help in any organization, believe me that there are a lot of people
Yeah.
who care about what you're doing, who love to see what you're doing. And I just wanted to give you the acknowledgement because
Thank you.
I have
Thank you,
enjoyed
Joyce.
the journey of watching him.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Joyce. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Sir, Ms. Andrew
Dave.
Young raised his hand, and then we'll come to you.
Dave Simpson.
I just want to know, how did you deal with frustrations at Coca-Cola versus how did you deal with frustrations in the city council?
You know, I was going to say that's a loaded question. The frustrations in city council and in the public sector were real. And, you know, one of the things that frustrated me most about working in the government sector, public sector, was the amount of time it took to get things done. I mean, I am by nature an impatient person. My wife and everybody can tell you that I get a little impatient. And the grind of bureaucracy is something that I just get totally frustrated with sometimes. But I had to learn how to be a politician. And that learning how to be a politician in the public and government sector taught me how to be a politician in the corporate world. And many of the lessons I learned through that process of learning how to be patient, learning how to build consensus, which is what you got to do as a politician to get a piece of legislation passed or to get a tax increase or whatever. You got to build a consensus. Those lessons that I learned in the public sector bode well for me as I went to the private sector. In the private sector, you're going to experience a lot of stuff that you didn't expect. I did believe that performance and results was all that you needed to be judged on. But sometimes that ain't enough. And that's when it takes what I call, knowing the right people who can make a difference in the organization and having trust and confidence that they're not going to throw you under the bus. Learning those kinds of things that you don't find in the textbooks, instinctive kind of things, is what made my journey worth it all. I found a lot of situations in South Africa, and no one asked me the question about how did I, as a black man, operate in apartheid South Africa at a time when you couldn't distinguish in any way, shape, form, or fashion me from my brothers and sisters in South Africa. When we started going to South Africa, the South African government had a category they called honorary whites. And they designated any black person or person of color working for a foreign company coming into that country, you were an honorary white. Crazy. I was out one morning jogging. Most people know that I used to like jogging. I can't do it much anymore. I was jogging on a track of Johannesburg College of Education with a white colleague of mine who happened to be one of my direct reports. And so we're jogging around this rugby and soccer field, and all of a sudden I started hearing these catcalls from the stands. It was a group of Afrikaner white men who were calling me the N-word, get off of their track. Now the reason why I chose that particular track to run around is that just the day before, I was at the Johannesburg College of Education handing them a big check from the Coca-Cola company to send some social workers to KwaZulu. I said, okay, I think we can run safely around here. Well, getting back to the story of being an honorary white. So Peter said to me, Carl, remember Peter Rosen?
I remember him well.
Peter, he'll attest to that. He said, Carl, what should we do? I said, go up there and tell him I'm an honorary white. So I said, no, Peter, don't do that. Something hit me quite, my daddy taught us as we were growing up in Jim Crow South and in the rural South, never run from anybody, never turn your back, and especially don't run from a white man. Never turn your back, never run. It pains me sometimes now to watch television, to see young black men running away from an armed white police officer. I mean, it's something that absolutely, but anyway, back to the story.
Yeah.
I said, Peter, I said, follow me. I finished my jog around the track. I wasn't going to stop. I knew I was in danger. So I said, Peter, follow me. I walked straight up through the middle of these 13 to 14 Afrikaners and spoke to them. Good morning, how are you? How are you doing, sir? And they just faded away and melted in that track. They realized that I was an honorary white and African American. Had I been a black South African, they had the legal right to jerk me off of that track, whip me, beat me, maim me, and detain me if I was still alive until the police came. Crazy system. Back to the issue of not being afraid.
Right. There you go.
Wasn't scared.
Wasn't scared. You had a question?
Dave.
Kind of share with us how you were able to navigate the systems over in South Africa, but share with us how you were able to empower so many just common people in Atlanta. I walk in the barbershop, well, Ms. Long, folks drop your name, and these guys at the service station, it doesn't matter where it is, they all feel empowered once they have met you.
Well, Dave, to me, it's about the part of the value system that my folks taught me, and that was the humility side of life. And that you send the elevator back down where you started, and you bring others up with you. One of the things that I did at City Hall all the time, there was a little cafeteria down in the basement. When other members of the council and I were sitting down having lunch, I would be back in the kitchen just chit-chatting with the cooks and the waitresses. And I do the same thing with cab drivers, with orderlies, with people. And that's what my mother and father, I didn't learn this stuff at Harvard or Clark or Pitt. I learned it in the cotton fields, how my mother and father treated us the way they wanted others to treat them. And they taught us those lessons growing up. Navigating Jim Crow South and navigating corporate America, the tools and personal values that you take with you just as, if not more important than anything you can learn technically anywhere in a classroom.
Now, we have a dilemma. We have run out of time because we have to sign some books. But I will tell you, I am a reader, and not because my name is in it, but because this is a good book. And it really does document the journey of Carl Ware, his family, and much of what we have lived here in Atlanta. I commend you and tell you to go buy it, and he will sign it. So we are going to segue to the book signing. Let's give Mr. Carl Ware a big round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
So, AUC-RWWL.
Okay, so you wanted, what do you want me to put?
AUC UC and RWWL. So this is for the library. RWWL.
L.
Dwayne Calvin II.
Dwayne?
You should do. Your social media and marketing. Because see, that's why. See, I didn't get on Facebook until my wife.